Hello and welcome everybody from all of us here at Emmaus Cornwall. We are absolutely delighted that you've chosen to spend your Thursday evening with us tonight. It is our first online event and we're very excited to have you all with us. I am one of the trustees of Emmaus Cornwall, and for those of you who don't know Emmaus, we are a charity providing a home and meaningful employment to formerly homeless people in the shape of self-sustaining residential communities where people can stay as long as they need to get back on their feet and have worthwhile, meaningful employment opportunities while they're there. We are fundraising to create the first Emmaus community in Cornwall, and this event is the first in a series of fundraising efforts, and we so appreciate your support by attending this event tonight. It is our first online event, so if there are any technical hitches, do please forgive us and we will attempt to get the show back on the road as soon as we possibly can. The wonders of modern technology mean that we are welcoming people not just from the four corners of Cornwall, but from all around the world, and it is completely thrilling to have you with us. One of my fellow trustees is Raynor Winn, and she is the star of the show tonight. And she is talking with fellow author Cathy Rentzenbrink, who also lives in Cornwall. If you have any questions for Raynor or for Cathy, if you could put those in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, that would be brilliant. And now I think if we can all sit back in our sofas, this is the point where if we were in a live venue, there'd be a round of applause for Cathy and Raynor. So with the sound of virtual clapping in our ears, I'd like to hand over to both of them now, and I'm sure that we are going to be in for a treat for the rest of the next hour, and I look forward to seeing you at the end of their discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was delightful. Hello everyone, the wonders of technology indeed. This is the bit usually where Ray and I would be shuffling out onto the stage and looking out into the audience and seeing your smiles and making lots of lovely eye contact with you. I have learnt that with these events you can achieve a certain degree of intimacy. I'm just going to imagine that I can see you all and have that delicious, lovely human contact with you all, and that's what I'm going to do for the next hour. So you can join me in that. It's very lovely to have been brought together in this community. All fundraising for Emmaus, and as Jo said, lots of you not only buying tickets, she told me earlier on, but also making generous donations, so thank you very much. Now I'm going to introduce Raynor Winn, my fellow person here today. Ray, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Cathy, and lovely to be here to talk to you again. And thank you for everyone who's, as you said, bought tickets, and it's really generous of them.
Yeah, so we're going to have a great hour. As Jo said, I'm keen to take lots of questions from people. I mean, there are 223 of you, so I won't probably be able to take one from everyone, but I'd love to see questions. Put them in the Q&A box. I'll get to them in the end, but equally, if I'm going to open it and put it on the side, and without distracting me from focusing also on Ray, I might manage to feed a couple in during the event, which would be very exciting. So perhaps we could start, Ray. The Salt Path was a hugely successful book. I often think when books exist, they feel really solid, like they were always going to be so. But that wasn't really the case, was it, with the Salt Path? Tell us about what led to it.
No, it certainly wasn't with the intention of writing a book. Because Salt Path came from really what had been the worst week of our lives, a week when we were living in a property where it wasn't just a house, it was a home. It was our dream home. It was a place that we'd bought when we were probably about 30 and spent the following 20 years of our lives working on. We'd bought it with all the enthusiasm of youth and all those dreams of what you're going to do with your future. And it was a place that was in the hills in Wales. It was a ruin. It had got holes in the walls and the roof was falling in, but it was everything that we dreamt of. And we moved in with huge amount of enthusiasm and hope for what that place would bring us. And we spent the next 20 years of our lives restoring it, converting the outbuildings, turning those into a holiday home that became our main source of income. Our children grew up there and they left and went to university, and it was our perfect life. It was what we'd hoped for. But then, unfortunately, in the background, we'd had a dispute with a friend, a financial dispute with a friend that resulted in a court case that saw us being served with an eviction notice from our home, from that place that we'd put so much effort into. And it was in the awful week that we were given to pack 20 years of life into boxes. During that week, that Moth had what we thought was going to be just a routine hospital appointment. Turned out to be anything but. And he was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease that has no treatment and no cure. And it just became a nightmare. It was in the final moments in the house when the bailiffs were knocking at the door, just hammering on the door, trying to get in to change the locks. And we were under the stairs. We were just hiding under the stairs. And I think not really thinking that some miracle would happen and we wouldn't have to leave, but really because we just weren't ready to take that final step over the threshold. And it was in that moment that I saw a book in a packing case about a young man who'd walked the South West Coast path with his dog. And it was a book I'd read decades before, but just in that awful moment, just seemed like the most obvious thing to do, just to fill a rucksack and go for a walk. And so that's what we did. And that the Salt Path was the story of that walk and everything that entailed.
And then eventually it became a hugely successful book, and we'll dig into a bit more of that later. You know, we'll get onto a bit more of the story of it later on. But you do now have another book out called The Wild Silence, a development, a companion piece. Another wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I wonder, maybe you'd read a little bit for us, would you?
I would, I'd love to. If I read just from the beginning of The Wild Silence, because that'll give you a real feel of what that book's about. So this is from the beginning, chapter 1. I should have been in bed, sleeping like the rest of the country, not on an ice-cold rock on a cliff top before the dawn of New Year's Day. But as my eyes opened in the darkness of a winter night, I'd felt the same agitation that had been keeping me awake for months, heard the same sounds whispering in my head, and I'd had to go. Through the enclosed, narrow streets of Polruan, where curtains were drawn and quietness had settled, all the revellers, fireworks and noise of the night before had disappeared. A dark stillness had returned, broken only by pools of streetlight and the sense of the river moving, wide and deep near its mouth, but heaving inland with the force of the tide. The surface shattering into 1,000 reflected lights. Only one boat was moored in a fast-running current, its bows straining on the anchor chain, its stern drifting in a rhythmic fishtail motion. I walked beyond the last of the houses and out onto the open field. I didn't need a torch. I'd come to know this route so well that even in the gloom, my feet found their way to a foot-wide strip of worn earth, where wind that winds its way through gorse and rock, up steep hewn steps, where the land falls away to the sea, breaking against the deep blackness of the cliff below. Then beneath the arched, wind-shaped hawthorn, bent and contorted as it shadows the shape of the land. Up rough, broken ground, my feet barely visible, through the gate to where the land flattens and the wind rises. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. I could feel the pull of the coast in both directions as I stretched my arms wide and blended into the unseen, craggy, well-known shapes. My exhaled breath became the wind, as did I. In a field just back from the coast path, I found my way to a small rocky outcrop, surrounded by an arc of gorse bushes, where the sheep had worn away the grass as they pushed themselves in to shelter from the weather. A place to stop and sit. The agitation in my body began to fade, and I let go, slipping beneath the wave of exhaustion. The darkness was dense and impenetrable, but the air hissed through the gorse above my head, carrying the acidic scent of the needled leaves as the weight of the sea on the cliff below boomed through the earth in a steady, rhythmic vibration. I curled in a ball. The hood of my coat pulled over my hat, gloved hands under my armpits, and my thoughts finally moved outside my head, dissipating in the wild black air. No voice in my head, only silence. I couldn't think anymore, only feel, and gave in to sleep, a deep, brief, total oblivion. A slight wash of light broke the darkness, bringing me back into my aching, cramped body, but I didn't move. I stayed curled tight, my body wrapped, hanging onto a small scrap of warmth. A dark form slipped through the greyness overhead, his firm tail and long, broad wings tipping only slightly into the wind as he dipped over the cliff edge, disappearing from view. My eyes held the clearing skyline, waiting for his return, not blinking in case I missed him. My head ached from the effort, and my attention slipped to the horizon as the slightest sliver of golden light began to break, brief and brilliant, before a curtain of squalling rain far out at sea obscured the wonder. Then he came silently back from below, rising into the sky without effort and hanging above the scrub of the headland. His dark back and black-tipped wings almost blended with the low sky. Only the flash of white above his tail gave him away as a harrier hoping for breakfast. Uncurling, with a dull pain in my hips, I crawled out from beneath the gorse to see a badger leaving the coast path and climbing up through the field towards some undergrowth at the far fence. His short, stubby legs moved quickly through the patchy, tufted grass. Caught out by the light, up too late, stirred from his winter slowness, he'd been driven into the cold night by hunger. But now he needed to be back in his set, deep underground, safe in his tunnel. Looking around, checking the air, then he was gone, slipping into his safe, invisible world. He'd gone to Earth. In the faint, greying lift of light, I climbed onto the last rock and sat with my feet hanging over the edge, at the edge of the land and the start of the sea, in a space between worlds, at a time between years, in a life between lives. I'm lost, but here, at least for a moment, I'm found.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I've read that several times. I've read the book, I've reviewed the book, I've interviewed you, but the utter joy and privilege of hearing you read from it is just wonderful. So I hope you enjoyed it as well, audience. I'm sure you did. Ray, tell us about being homeless. You lost your home, you're on the top path. You say, I think, that at times you were so hungry it hurt. You have very little money. And I was really struck that as well as all that, there was a problem, wasn't there, in how you communicated what you were doing to people? Because when you told them that you had no home, what did you encounter?
Absolutely. I mean, we became homeless the moment we stepped out of that door. And I had at that point no idea what homelessness really meant, because it wasn't something I'd really encountered in my life. I'd lived a very ordinary life in a very rural place, and homelessness just hadn't entered my realm. So to find myself in that position was really quite difficult to come to understand what exactly I was facing, because I had nothing to measure it against. So when we were walking, you were right, we were cold, we were hungry a lot of the time. We had hardly any money, so we weren't staying in campsites. We were sleeping wild, camping wild, because it was the only way we could exist. And we passed a lot of people, we encountered a lot of people, met and had conversations with many people on that walk. And many people would ask us, after we'd started to tell them our story, well, how come you have so much time to walk so far? And initially we responded quite honestly, because why wouldn't we? And we said, well, we've lost our home, we've lost everything, and we're just walking because we've got nothing else, nowhere else to be. And I've said this many times, but people did actually physically recoil, draw their dogs in on the retractable leads, and gather their children. And it came as such a shock to us, that real sense of suddenly who we were, what we were within society had shifted. Suddenly, from someone else's point of view, we were something else, somebody else. To us, we were still those same people, still the same people that had walked out of that door. But to people on the other side of our conversation, we had become something else, something to be afraid of, something to withdraw from. So as time went by and people asked us, as they kept doing, you know, how come you have so much time? We sort of shifted our story a little, and we started to say, well, actually, we've sold our house and we're just going where the wind blows. And then suddenly it was a very, very different response. People were, wow, inspirational, a midlife moment. So it became a real eye-opener to see how different our perception of someone is, just with the change of one little word from lost our house to sold our house. How different that response was shocking. And with all those responses, we started to lose a real sense of who we were in our own lives, never mind the wider society. And that loss of sense of self took us down to probably our lowest point in the whole experience, I would think.
I live in Falmouth, and you know, your experiences in Falmouth weren't very nice. And I so often think, like, I wish I could time travel and go and kind of, like, you know, meet up with you and be a bit nicer. And I often look at people, and I was thinking, I wonder if you could advise me. I often look at people and I often think, like, I wish I knew if anybody who's, because I think a lot of people are walking the path because they've read your book. Obviously not so much at the moment because we're not allowed to move around. But there was a man recently, and he did seem to have all his belongings with him. But I didn't know how to. I really wanted to say to him, I'm going to go get myself a sandwich. Could I buy you something? But then I thought, would that be a bit embarrassing if he didn't need the sandwich? What should I have done? Should I have just asked him, or was it a bit? I didn't know whether I was just over imagining based on having read your book and feeling so bad about your experiences in Falmouth.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? You know, what can we actually do there and then spontaneously on that practical level? And do you just give someone money? Do you just give them a random sandwich? But I think deciding what to do is really simple when you think that that person there sitting in that doorway, wherever you're seeing that person, is an individual, a person who's come to that homeless point through their own journey, not through.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I mean, my person wasn't. I didn't think he was homeless necessarily. Yeah. I think he was going on the path, and I was trying to work out whether.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
No, I think it's really. I think it's. I would always do the human thing. I hope.
Absolutely.
I
think definitely ask that person what he needs, without a doubt. Just bowing there and ask them what they need. Yeah. Last week I met somebody sitting outside the co-op, and I thought, should I take him a sandwich or what? So I went and asked him what he needed, and he said, no, I've actually just got some accommodation, but I have got absolutely no money, and I need to put some money in the electric. So, you know, you have to ask somebody, because who knows what their situation is.
Yeah. And then there are those small sort of personal actions, aren't there? And then obviously also broader things like Emmaus. Maybe talk to us a bit about about Emmaus and your involvement and what you hope for the charity.
Well, yeah, I mean, Emmaus UK has been in this country since the 90s. I think there are 29 Emmaus communities across the UK, but we don't have one here in Cornwall. And I'd sort of had some connection with them through a talk that I was giving a few years ago. But then I was approached by Emmaus to become a trustee of Emmaus Cornwall, and I felt that was such a great honour to be asked to take part in the creation of a community, and such an important thing to me to get that community off the ground and helping people. So absolutely, I had to accept it because it is such an important thing in my life to do what we can to make that happen.
I've got a lovely question here from Karen Davis, who's saying that she also wants to say that you're an amazing woman, so I should pass that on. It's very nice. Who spoke to her vicar tonight, who used to work at All Souls in Langham Place and work with the homeless in Lincoln Inn, and that the homeless there said what they most missed about stable life was entertainment. And she'd like to know, what do you most miss when homeless?
Yeah, I know what they mean. I mean, nights can be very long, can be interminable, I'm sure, if you're on your own. For me, it was simple things. It was the real simple stuff, like putting a kettle on and there always being a tea bagger available, and above all else, because of the way we were existing and the way we were living wild on those headlands, I've got to say, the thing I missed the most was a flushing toilet. So, you know, everyone has their own priorities.
That's wonderful. I really like that. I mean, I think it is important, isn't it, to, you know, when you have a home, to remain grateful at quite a micro level for what you have. I think you can take those things for granted, can't you?
Oh, you really can. Yes.
Do you feel that your experience, I mean, does it help you not to take things for granted, because you've had such an extreme experience of not having a place to call your own?
I think so. I think when you've lost just about every material thing that you have, it changes your perspective on things. It changes how you view things that you previously thought were necessary and that you needed, and you realise you actually don't need much at all to actually basically survive. And it does change the way you feel about things. So when suddenly you do have more than what you need, you have a duvet, you have a pillow, you have a flushing toilet, those things really are important to you, and you don't take them for granted at all. Yeah, it does completely change the way you feel about just ordinary everyday life.
I love everything about both your books. There is a very funny bit in The Salt Path where suddenly the people that you meet start treating you extremely well. I don't want to sort of give away the bit I'm mentioning of. Do you know the bit I mean, and would you tell us about it? Mistaken identity, where people think Moth is someone else, you realise.
Yes, we didn't know when we were walking that at the same time this famous poet was walking the same piece of path, preparing to write his book, walking away. I mean, he's since now, Simon Armitage has since now become the poet laureate, and this has become like an ongoing joke that I never actually meet him, because we didn't meet him on that path, but always he was just a few days behind us. But lots of people were preparing for his arrival. So when two middle-aged people with backpacks and the same coloured hat on appeared, they immediately jumped to a lot of conclusions. So we were homeless, we were hungry, and we would enter villages where a group of old ladies would say, "Oh, Simon, you're here early. Come and have a cup of tea." We were like, "But we're not, this isn't Simon." They said, "No, we understand. You don't want anyone to know. Come and drink tea." So off we went, drank a tea. Got to the next village. "Oh, Simon, you're here early. Come and eat. We've baked you a cake." And we were like, "Oh, cake, lovely, great." off we went to eat the cake. And then it sort of came to a head when we came to, we'd had a really bad day. We'd had no water, hardly any food. And we met a man who obviously was equally misguided as to who we were, and said, come back to my house, I've got a huge lasagna. So we went back to his house and we ate his lasagna and we drank his wine. And it got very late in the evening. It was about 11:30. He said, okay, Simon, you've strung this out long enough. I need a poem. Well, you know, Moth might read Beowulf, but he is definitely not a poet. But he did his best with a little ditty that his dad used to recite in the builder's cabin at lunchtime about a goat and a sinking ship. But I've been told I can't repeat this on Zoom events, so. But it must have done a trick because we're left with a bacon sandwich the next day.
I love that. I'd like you to tell us a bit about how you wrote the book, and I've got a couple of questions because Kate McIver Redwood is asking about whether you made notes when you were walking, and Amanda Stratford is saying, was there a specific trigger to writing it? And of course, one of the things I loved about The Wild Silence is that you do talk about how you wrote The Salt Path, which I really enjoyed. So perhaps you tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, when we came to the end of the Salt Path, we were very lucky. We were offered accommodation, and we moved into the accommodation, and Moth began studying for a degree. His health had improved incredibly as we walked, but when he became stationary and doing his degree, his health really started to decline very quickly, to the point where he was losing his memory, forgetting a lot of things, especially really, really important little details of our walk. And it felt so special to me, such an important thing that we'd done. I was desperate that he wouldn't forget it all. And so I got the guidebook out, that amazing little plastic covered guidebook of Paddy Dillon's. And I opened it, and it had the incredible descriptions that Paddy writes of the path, and an OS map that runs right through the book that covers the whole of the path. But also in the margins of that book were Moth's penciled notes that he'd made in the tent at night, just saying where we camped, just a couple of words about somebody that we might have met that day. And when I put those three together, it was as if I could almost smell the path. I could almost feel the salt wind. And I thought, if I can capture this and I can write it down, then Moth will read it and he might remember that path as clearly as I did. And so I started to write it, and I wrote it entirely for him, with the hope that when he read it, he would feel like it was right there on the path next to me, just facing the wind and walking. And that is what the Salt Path was. That's what it began as, just that for him.
That's lovely. And would you tell us about lightly salted blackberries?
Well, yes, that was such a to me such an important part of that walk. It was a really foggy, misty, wet day, and we were walking across a headland, and we saw these two old gentlemen coming up a path from a cove down below, and one of them was all bundled up, hat, coat, gloves, the whole lot. The other one was bathers and flip-flops, but he was carrying a Tupperware box. And as he got closer to us, I could see it was a box full of blackberries, and he offered us one. Well, I didn't want to take it because up until that point, we'd eaten blackberries as we've been walking along, and they'd been tart and sharp and really not nice at all. But I bit into this blackberry, and it was like the most perfect purple autumnal flavour, like nothing I'd ever eaten before. And I said, what is this? Is this some rare species from down in the cove? And he said, no, this is something that is so special. It's a lightly salted blackberry. When the mist comes in and lays a layer of salt on a perfectly ripe blackberry, then you get something that money can't buy and chefs can't create. It's a gift of time and nature. And I just held on to that. I held on to that idea of a gift of time and nature, because for me, that's what that walk had been. It had been like a gift. At the lowest point in our lives, nature had given us a gift. And I held on to that idea so much that when I gave the manuscript to the publishers, it was titled Lightly Salted Blackberries. And the first thing they said was, that title has got to go. Sounds like a cookery book.
And they were probably right, because The Salt Path is a brilliant title, but I utterly love the story. And I love the fact that we get the story in the Salt Path, and then we get because in The Wild Silence you write about writing the book, we sort of then get the story of it being used and rejected as the title in The Wild Silence. So it's a very nice callback between the two books, which is brilliant. This is something I wanted to ask you about, and Charlotte Caldwell has expressed it very well here, so I'm going to ask her question. Rayna, she says, in The Wild Silence, you talk about finding it hard to trust people. For example, your experience with Sam and the farm offer. And do you find it easier to trust people as time goes on?
I think trust is such a difficult thing. It's such an elusive feeling. It's not something that you can create. It's something that has to grow and develop over time. And we'd had that completely destroyed. We trusted our friend, and that had led us to losing our house. And then as we were walking, we met all those reactions of prejudice and preconceptions that people were carrying. And that really destroyed our trust in human nature and our belief in other people. So just that ordinary, everyday sense when you meet somebody of you just immediately trust them, that had gone. And our immediate reaction to people was one of stepping away, withdrawal. And I think that loss of trust was the hardest thing to overcome when we tried to move back from homelessness into ordinary everyday life. That was the biggest hurdle. So when we had the offer that we did from Sam, which I don't want to give too much away, but the offer that we did from Sam, then trust was the biggest problem, because you can't create it. You can't just find it and resurrect it. It's something that has to be built. And I think it must be something that's the same for most people that have been homeless. And that is a huge barrier back into ordinary life, back into everyday life. And I think in a way, that's something that's wonderful about the whole Emmaus concept, is the idea of creating communities where people who have been homeless can live and work together and form that community between themselves. And I think when you understand that feeling without having to explain it, when you understand it, then it's easier to work together with those people to rebuild your life, to find a way back into what we see as normal life, and to re-find that inner strength, that self-belief, because without that, it's almost impossible to go forwards.
And we have to somehow work out how to trust in life, don't we, really?
Absolutely. To trust in life, to trust in ourselves, to trust that things will be okay. And that's a really hard thing to get back when that's been destroyed. It's a long journey back.
Lots of people are asking, and almost tentatively asking, I hope it's okay to ask, and this is the thing that people always ask me. If I say that I'm interviewing you, people say, first of all, oh, I loved her book so much, it's so wonderful. And then they say, I want to walk the Salt Path one day. And then they say, do you know how moth is now? So I know that everybody wants to ask, and again, always feeling a sort of a sense of humility, that we hope it's okay to ask.
Yeah, of course it's okay to ask. Yeah, his health improved so much when we were walking, and we really thought we would hang on to that high point of his health. And then he did his degree, which was absolutely amazing in so many ways. And he passed and he graduated in his cap and gown, and it was fantastic. But it has really taken a toll on his health, just all that stationary time. And then we found, through Sam's amazing offer, we've found a way to live where he can be active outdoors in nature, and that be part of his life and a core part of his life. And that's helped him find a plateau with his health. But nothing lifts his health like a long walk, like a really big long walk with his rucksack on his back. So I just keep dragging him off everywhere I can. And he's had 1 or 2 bad spells through the last few months, but at the moment he's in a really good place. So time for another walk, I think.
Tell us a bit about Iceland, and again, this isn't a new thing to anybody who's already read your work. I mean, the way you write about landscape and nature is amazing, and I so enjoy. I've got a bit of a thing about Iceland. I'd like to go, and it was just so enjoyable to experience it through your words. But maybe just tell us a bit about the desire to go and get back on the walking path.
Yeah, it was that idea that his health was at its best when we were walking. He started to feel as if he would like to go for another quite big walk, but we didn't have an awful lot of time because I was doing publicity for the Salt Path, and so time was really limited. But we had these few weeks, this little gap of a few weeks, and we got this book called Epic Hikes, and there was this amazing picturing of these multicoloured mountains. So I kept leaving it open on the table or on the bed, and a few weeks later, really out of the blue, and I don't know how, Moth said, I'd really like to go to Iceland. So we did. We found ourselves in Iceland. And we caught a bus that took us from the capital into the southern highlands of Iceland. It was an off-road bus that went through lava fields and broken, rough terrain, through mountains that were just like nothing I can even describe. And then it dropped us at this place called Landmannalaugar. It's a name on a map, but when you get there, it isn't really a place. It's just like a shed with an old school bus and a collection of tents around it, at the head of an extinct lava flow, on the edge of the biggest glacial riverbed that I've ever seen. And then it drove away, and we were just there. Well, luckily it wasn't just me and Moth, because we'd gone with Dave and Julie. You might remember Dave and Julie from the Salt Path. We met them on the south coast, and they'd gone with us, and it rained. And it rained and it rained, and it was beyond Cornish rain. It was just vertical falling water, and it was so cold. We'd left here in a heat wave at the end of August, and we arrived there at the beginning of their winter. And it was such a shock to find it was so cold. So we just sat in the river, in this hot, steaming river, for 2 days, because it was the only warm place to be. And then it stopped raining, and we set off on this trail, the Laugavga Trail, through the incredible multicoloured mountains that were in that book. And it was the most remarkable thing I've ever done, because it was like a walk through evolution almost. It was through these incredible mountains full of sulphur plumes and ash and soot and extinct lava. It was like you were walking through where the earth was being reborn, and then slowly that soot was turning into mush, was turning into soil, and there was hints of vegetation. And then you'd walk further and into sort of little scrubby areas of birch trees, and it really did feel like a walk through evolution. And it sort of left me with the feeling that actually, you know, no matter what we do, whether we destroy everything or whether we don't, that the earth's going to go on perfectly well without us in it. And it sort of tied up everything I've been talking about in A Wild Silence. So that it was that sense of the earth going on regardless that I had to include Iceland at the end of The Wild Silence, because it was such a incredible landscape.
And then I think you were going to go somewhere else, and then obviously other global events overtook and sort of grounded you. But do you have an idea for, you know, when this is all over, where you might like to go in the future? I'm not asking you to tell us, but I'm just wondering whether there's a sort of a plan, and whether or not that sort of propels you through this time.
Yeah, I have got a plan for hopefully in a couple of months' time, but who knows? Like everybody else, our plans are up in the air. But my rucksack's packed. It's packed and ready. My boots are standing by it, waiting. So the moment we're told we can go out, I'm ready to go.
Oh, that's brilliant. I'm going to do some more of these brilliant questions. Can I just remind you, audience, to put them in the Q&A box, because I can see there's stuff in the chat, but it's more difficult for me to look in two places. So put anything in the Q&A box that you want me to see. So brilliant question here from Pippa Hayward. This is a real writer's question, this is. She says, firstly, thanks for your inspirational books. And then she says, what's the cost of your very intimate personal story becoming public? And she says, you and Moth have completely reinvented yourselves in your lives, and how different do you feel inside after this reinvention of yourselves? Loads of meaty kind of memoir-y stuff to get at there, isn't there?
Yeah. Moth and I, we've been together since I was a teenager. In fact, I think probably all of my adult life he's been in it. So we've been through many transformations over those years, from eco warrior teenagers to sensible, almost sensible parents, to homeless, to whatever we are now. I'm not really sure. So it's just another change in life. It's just another alteration. And I wrote that book. I wrote it for Moth. I wasn't thinking at the time that, you know, hundreds of thousands of people were going to read it, or I might not have shared quite such intimate details. Maybe not quite so much about my bowel habits, that's for sure. But I think a wonderful thing that's come from that is that by being so open, by sharing everything, is the response that I've had from other people. Is that people have shared their stories and shared their hopes and their fears, and I've come to realise through it all that there aren't many of us that get through life without it falling apart in one way or another. Emotional, financial, health reasons. We all go through the mill somehow, somewhere along the way, and I think there's a unity in that. There's something to be taken from that. I think that we all share those same emotions, those same frailties, and I think just the sharing of those stories with so many people that had read the book, and people at book events, and people who've sent me letters and messages. It's been the sharing of those stories that I think has started to rebuild my sense of trust, that sense of belief, and sense of actually belonging to the human race again. Yeah, so frightening in one way to have given away so much, but I've been given back so much as well that I think worth it for that.
That's lovely, thank you. This is a very good question from Nikki, who says, have you convinced the medical fraternity to alter their advice from be careful on the stairs to exercise and live life to the full? So perhaps you could explain be careful on the stairs to us, and then
yes,
and then tell us if it has had any impact.
When Moth had his first diagnosis, we were told that there was absolutely nothing that could be done. There was no treatment, there was no cure. So go away, don't get too tired, and be careful on the stairs. And that was the advice that we were given. So we walked the Southwest Coast Path, which is 630 miles, with an ascent that's equivalent to climbing Everest nearly 4 times. Got quite tired, climbed up quite a lot of stairs, and Moth's health improved in ways that we hadn't imagined possible. So now, after visiting many consultants and doctors since, then they've all come to the conclusion that they can't advise us to do any more walks. They can't advise us to carry on taking the risks maybe that we did before. but because there's not enough weight of evidence to back up them, to allow them to give that advice. They have to have so much evidence in order to give that advice. But the last time we did speak to the consultant, he did say, do whatever you want, keep doing what you're doing, because it's doing something that I can't explain. But I have to say it right now, be careful on the stairs. So it's a difficult quandary for the medical profession, I think.
That's lovely, thank you. And I love this question from Sally Hayward. She says, you seem very hardcore with the walking. Now you've had a degree of success, would you ever go 5-star? And there's an enjoyable 3 question marks.
5-star. Well, I mean, I love wild camping. There's something absolutely connecting about wild camping, that sense of living as part of nature, not alongside it, but actually part of it, to just open those tent flaps in the morning and you're in the wild, remote spot. I love that. There's something that feeds me in a way I can't explain. But I have to say, I am partial to an occasional shower. So, you know, maybe not every night, but occasionally, and maybe not 5-star, but maybe a shower here and there wouldn't go amiss.
A few people, including Grace Alexander, asking, do you have a favourite section of the Cornish coast path? Can I just say, if you do come back to Falmouth, we'll be nicer this time.
I mean, it's such a remarkable path, isn't it? Cornwall is so varied. The north is wild and rugged, and the south is sort of tranquil and beautiful. But the place I'm always drawn back to, and I've been back and done that section over and over and over, is St Ives around Porthcurno. And there's just something about when you get out onto those blocky granite cliffs beyond the Land's End building, onto those incredible granite cliffs, and you're right there at the very edge of the land, and there's nothing between you and the Atlantic and whatever wild weather systems come pouring in from there. And I think there's a huge sense of freedom, and I just love to go back there and just breathe in that wind, and there's just something just unbeatable about that, really.
There's a lovely question earlier, and apologies, I can't now see who asked it, but about whether or not you and Moth now would think of Cornwall as home.
Home, it's such a weird concept, isn't it, home? You know, I really thought when we lost our house, I would never feel that sense of home again, because I really thought it was those stone walls around me. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, as we were walking, I think I came to realise that home's not really about your house. It's about what gives you a sense of safety, sense of security. And I think that would always be, for me, that would always be my family and the natural world. But here in Cornwall, I've found a place where I feel a sense of harmony, and where we've been accepted with open arms by beautiful, generous people who've just taken us in. And if that's what home is, then yeah, I do regard it as home.
That's lovely. Sue Clark says, you talked in the Wild Silence about being terrified doing talks to groups like us. Has it got easier for you? It seems so, she says. Maybe tell us about that.
Oh yeah, well, when I first, the early days of publishing a book, and the publishers told me that I would have to take part in PR, that I would have to go out and actually talk to people about my book, I was absolutely terrified. So the first few times I had to go onto a stage, I could barely breathe. I was so scared. But I think over time, I think I've come to actually enjoy sharing the stories, sharing the tales from the path, talking to people about homelessness. And it's very easy to do a Zoom event because it's actually just me and you, Cathy, isn't it? Nobody else is listening in at all, so it's absolutely fine.
They're all delightful and asking wonderful questions. I love this one from Miranda Avis. This is one of the sort of questions where I long to know more of the story behind it, but I'll ask the question. Miranda says, I'm desperate to wild camp the Southwest Path, but my husband is more legal than me. Was it mentally quite hard work being a wild camper. And Miranda, I would love to swap notes with you on what it's like when you have a different attitude within the relationship to things like that. But maybe, Rayna, you can just tell us how that works, the wild camping.
Absolutely, yeah, that must be really awkward. Yes, so in this country, it's not actually illegal, as in criminal, to wild camp, but under civil law it is illegal to wild camp, except on parts of Dartmoor. You can wild camp just about anywhere in Scotland, but in England no, and there's a huge move to try to actually make it criminally illegal to wild camp, so that actually if that comes about, that incredibly, actually quite draconian measure comes about, then we wouldn't only have been homeless, but we would have been criminal and homeless. So something to consider there. But at the moment, that's not the case, not yet, I don't believe. But it is quite exhausting, actually, wild camping. It's really quite an exhausting thing, because you have to try to keep yourself away from people, keep away from habitation, keep away from roads, keep away from the edge of the cliff. You know, so many things that you've got to consider, and it's not easy, especially when really you try to not pitch your tent until it's getting dark, which can often leave you pitching your tent in an unknown spot. So you wake up in the morning, it can be a real surprise where you find yourself. You know, we've woken up in the morning on crumbling cliffs where beneath has been caved out, and we're just hanging on the teetering last edge of the soil. And then other mornings when we woke up and there were just fields full of ladybirds hatching into their first flight, or foggy headlands where we woke to hear the seals calling in the cove below. And remarkable, really life-affirming, connecting to nature events and moments in our lives. And how can that be criminal? How can we actually criminalise that in a time when, if we're all to actually care about our climate and our environment, we need to be connected to it, we need to feel it, we need to understand it, but we should criminalise the experience of that. It's a debate, ongoing one, I think, even within your house.
Lots of people asking and hoping for a particular answer to this one, about whether or not you're writing another book.
Early days, but I have started to put some notes together, and there should be, fingers crossed, another book next year.
Oh, that's lovely. And someone asked earlier on, and apologies, but I can't now see who it was, but I thought it was a lovely question about whether or not you kind of knew you had, did you know that you were going to be good at the writing before you started writing The Salt Path, or did it come as a surprise?
Yeah, it was a huge surprise. It surprised me more than anyone else. I thought when I was a child, I thought I was going to grow up and become a writer and have a penguin on the spine of my book. That was my childhood dream. But again, life got in the way and I did other things and I didn't write anything at all. So when I sat down to write The Salt Path, that really was the first time I'd really written anything. So to find I could actually write really was quite a shock. That's why I have to keep writing now, because I've got all those years of unwritten things to say.
Oh, well, that's lovely. I'm sure we're all delighted to hear that there's more to come. Question from Anonymous, who says, thank you very much. The wonderful thing about your writing is the combination of nature writing and homelessness activism. It feels like a wonderfully effective soft activism and is particularly powerful given the autobiographical nature of the work. Do you feel audiences are more open to engaging in conversations about the harsh reality of the homelessness crisis in the UK now, more than when you started talking about your book?
Well, when I started talking about it, I was new to talking about it. So however those people were responding, I don't know how they were responding before that point. But I think maybe there's something about actually soft activism. That's one way of putting it. It's that in order to really care about something, you've got to feel a connection to what it feels like. well, if I can put over a story that helps people to understand how it feels to be homeless, how that makes you feel as a person, or how difficult it is to move out of homelessness and transition back into normal life. If I can put that over in a way that people can feel something of how that feels, then maybe we're a step closer towards us finding an answer to it. Because any problem, be it homelessness, be it the climate, whatever problem that is, you've got to feel the need to resolve it before you can resolve it. So soft activism, harsher activism, they go together, don't they? Because you have to understand before you can transform, I think.
And Sally's asking, how do homeless people tend to manage to turn their lives around once they've reached rock bottom?
It's different for everybody because everybody is an individual, but the role played by the incredible homeless charities that we have, I mean, here in Cornwall, we've got St Petrock's, which is a fantastic homeless charity that scoops people up off the street and helps them in those early days. And then Emmaus, that help people forward and on into some sort of way of finding their way back into life. Those are absolutely invaluable charities that many homeless people would never find their way out of homelessness without the support of those charities. And for other people, maybe friends, maybe families help them. Some very few people find their own way through it. And then there are those people that never ever find their way through. So it's anything and everything combined that has to stay as part of the picture. It's no one thing that helps all homeless people. That's why we have to keep supporting charities that tackle homelessness from every angle. And Emmaus is really powerful in doing that, in helping people forward. So
that's very lovely. And my dad was homeless when he was younger, and he used to sleep in the little shelter thing on the Prince of Wales Pier in Falmouth.
Oh wow!
Now he lives here happily. So there are good stories. We're very nearly at the end of our time. I'm going to ask you a very quick question, which is Siobhan's question about: do you have a new rucksack?
I do. Actually, weirdly, with the idea of another trip in mind, I bought a new rucksack, and I took everything out of my old one that I'd patched up for Iceland, and I put it in a new one, and I didn't like it, so I put it back in the old one and I returned it in the post. So back to the old one with the patches on it.
That's lovely. Very glad that success isn't going to your head with 5-star rucksacks. Rayna and everyone, I have felt this beautiful audience here tonight. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you, Rayna, for sharing with us with your characteristics, sort of generosity and poetic nature. It's been such a pleasure and a privilege for me to be here with you tonight and with you, delightful audience. And again, I think we should just imagine a lovely round of applause for Rayna and for you, audience, and your questions. And I'll hand back over to Jo.
Thank you, Cathy.
Gosh, thank you so much, Rayna and Cathy. I'm sure I speak for everybody where, I don't want you to stop. And I wish we had more time, we could keep going. I am lucky enough to be able to walk the coast path whenever I feel the need to, which has been frequent, certainly in the last year. But I'm pretty sure that for those people who aren't able to do that, your books, Rayna, are the quickest transport straight to the coast path, straight to nature and all of its therapeutic powers. And I think all the comments that have been coming in are really testimony to the amazing effect that your books have had on people. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I want to really thank our audience for your amazing, stimulating, exciting questions, for all of your fantastic feedback. It's been just really humbling actually for us for our first event. So we're completely thrilled. And And Cornwall, most people don't appreciate that it has a really acute homelessness problem, which makes our efforts, our fundraising efforts to create the first Emmaus community all the more important and urgent. So your support this evening is just phenomenal. This is the first event in a series, and I'm absolutely thrilled to bits to say that Cathy will be back in the hot seat on March the 11th, when she'll be talking to the president of Emmaus UK, who's none other than Terry Waite. And I'm sure that, like me, you won't be able to wait for that event. And in fact, you can head straight to our website right now to buy a ticket. And if you'd like to support us further, you can do that there too. That's emmaus.org.uk/Cornwall. So I would just like to say thank you again, really from all of us at Emmaus. It's been the most perfect Thursday evening in dreary January 2021. I can't think of a better way to have spent an hour than with Rayna and Cathy and all of you. And I'm sorry that there isn't more time, but we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Many thanks once more, and with all our best wishes for a lovely evening. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.